For decades, martial arts fans have whispered about a confrontation that supposedly never happened, but somehow never went away. Two legends. Two completely different fighting philosophies. And one question that still divides fans to this day. What really happened when Beyond the Lookout Yeung challenged Steven Seagal? Bolo Yeung was not just a movie villain. To those who trained, lifted, and fought seriously, he was a symbol of raw power and discipline. A man built like a tank, respected for his dedication to traditional kung fu and iron body conditioning. When Bolo walked into a room, people felt it, not because of fame, but because of presence. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, represented something very different. Controlled. Almost effortless. A master of Aikido, a martial art that focuses on balance, joint locks, and using an opponent's energy against them. On screen, Seagal made fights look easy. Too easy, some critics said. And that's where the controversy begins. According to long-standing rumors in martial arts circles, Bolo Yeung wasn't impressed by what he saw in movies. Some claim he openly questioned whether Aikido, especially Steven Seagal's version, would work against a real, powerful fighter. Others say Bolo wanted a friendly but serious test. Not a street fight. Not a spectacle. Just truth. But here's the problem. There are many versions of this story. Some say Bolo directly challenged Seagal and was ignored. Others claim Seagal refused because he had nothing to prove. And some insist the whole thing was exaggerated by fans who wanted to see a clash. This is where things get interesting. In martial arts culture, a challenge isn't always about violence. Sometimes, it's about ego. Sometimes, it's about respect. And sometimes, it's about exposing what's real, and what's just for show. So when people say, Bolo challenged Steven Seagal, the real question becomes, was it arrogance? Was it curiosity? Or was it just a myth that grew larger than the men themselves? Because when Kung Fu meets Aikido, it's not just fists versus locks, it's power versus principle. And that's why this story still matters. Before we go any further, let me ask you honestly, who do you think would have the advantage in a real confrontation? Bolo Yeung or Steven Seagal? And why? Drop your opinion in the comments. Because what comes next may completely change how you see both of them. To understand why this rumored challenge even mattered, you first have to understand who Bolo Yeung really was, beyond the movies, beyond the villain roles, beyond the intimidating stare. Bolo Yeung was not just big. He was disciplined. Born in Guangzhou, China, Bolo began training in traditional martial arts at a young age, long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. Kung Fu wasn't a hobby for him, it was a lifestyle. Training meant repetition, pain tolerance, structure, and patience. The kind of training that doesn't look flashy, but builds something real over time. Later, Bolo combined martial arts with serious bodybuilding, creating a physique that few could ignore. But here's the key point many people miss. His size wasn't just for show. It was built around control, balance, and conditioning, things that matter deeply in traditional kung fu systems. In real martial arts culture, physical strength alone doesn't earn respect. What earns respect is consistency, showing up, training daily, and mastering basics until they become instinct. This is why Beyond the Lookout was respected behind the scenes. When Bolo transitioned into films, especially alongside Bruce Lee, his reputation grew even stronger. People assumed he was just another muscle guy, but those who trained knew better. He moved with intention. He understood distance. He knew how to generate force efficiently. And that's important. Because when fans talk about Beyond the Lookout Yeung challenging Steven Seagal, they're not talking about a random celebrity calling someone out. They're talking about a man who genuinely believed in testing skill through reality, not just reputation. But here's where things get nuanced. Bolo came from a background where martial artists often tested each other informally, not to humiliate, but to understand. In many traditional schools, pressure testing wasn't optional. If your technique didn't work against resistance, it wasn't respected. This doesn't mean Beyond the Lookout was aggressive or reckless. It means he came from a culture where proof mattered more than performance. Now imagine how someone like that might view Hollywood martial arts. To a traditional fighter, watching perfectly choreographed movie fights, especially styles that rely heavily on cooperation, can raise doubts. Not hatred. Not jealousy. Just questions. And that's where the tension begins. Some insiders claim Bolo openly wondered whether Aikido techniques would still work against someone stronger, heavier, and unwilling to play along. Others say he was simply curious, wanting to feel the technique for himself. Let me ask you something honestly. Do you think a martial art should be tested against resistance to be considered effective? Or is philosophy just as important? Comment your thoughts. What made Bolo especially intimidating wasn't just his size, it was his confidence in fundamentals. He believed that strength, when combined with technique, creates pressure that exposes weaknesses. And that belief shaped how people interpreted his actions. To fans of Kung Fu, Bolo represented reality. To critics, he represented brute force. And to Hollywood, he represented danger, the kind that doesn't need cameras. This is why the rumored challenge gained so much traction. It wasn't just about two men. It was about two worldviews colliding. Do you believe size and strength still matter in a real fight today, or has technique completely replaced them? Why? Because to understand what happened next, we now have to look at the other side of the equation. To understand why the rumored challenge from Bolo Yeung became so controversial, we now have to look closely at Steven Seagal, not the movie character, but the martial artist behind the image. Steven Seagal didn't come from a traditional striking background like Kung Fu or Karate. His foundation was Aikido, a Japanese martial art that looks very different from what most people expect when they think of fighting. Aikido focuses on balance, joint locks, redirection, and control. Instead of meeting force with force, it aims to neutralize an attack by blending with it. In theory, strength matters less than timing, structure, and sensitivity. Aikido was never designed to win fights in the modern competitive sense. It was designed to end violence quickly, often without serious injury, especially useful against untrained attackers. This is important, because many people misunderstand Aikido by judging it through the wrong lens. When Steven Seagal appeared in Hollywood during the late 1980s and early 1990s, his fighting style looked completely different from anything audiences had seen before. No flashy kicks. No wild punches. Just calm movements and attackers flying to the ground. To fans, it looked effortless, almost mystical. To critics, it looked unrealistic, even staged. And that split opinion followed Seagal everywhere. Seagal claimed high-level Aikido credentials, including training in Japan and teaching students there. Some martial artists respected that. Others questioned how his Aikido would hold up against a trained, aggressive opponent who wasn't cooperating. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many Aikido demonstrations rely on compliant partners. This doesn't mean the techniques are fake, but it does mean they're rarely shown under full resistance. This is where doubts started to grow. As Seagal's fame increased, so did the gap between his on-screen dominance and real-world testing. Unlike fighters who competed in tournaments or open challenges, Seagal never publicly pressure-tested his skills against other well-known martial artists. To some, that meant confidence. To others, it meant avoidance. Let me ask you directly. Do you think a martial artist needs public fights to prove their skill, or is training enough? The issue wasn't that Aikido doesn't work. The issue was context. Aikido excels when an attacker grabs, pushes, or overcommits. But against someone like Bolo Yeung, heavier, stronger, disciplined, and trained to resist, the outcome becomes unpredictable. Martial arts are tools. A hammer is great for nails, but useless for screws. Effectiveness depends on the situation, not just the technique. This is why the rumored challenge mattered so much. It wasn't personal. It was philosophical. Kung Fu emphasizes structure, conditioning, and striking under pressure. Aikido emphasizes harmony, timing, and control. When these two worlds collide, neither side can rely purely on theory. And Steven Seagal knew this. Some insiders claim Seagal avoided direct challenges because Aikido wasn't meant for such tests. Others believe he simply had nothing to gain, only something to lose. If you were in Seagal's position, famous, respected, but questioned, would you accept a challenge or walk away? Why? As criticism grew, Seagal's reputation became more polarizing. Stories surfaced of him being difficult on set, overly confident, even dismissive of other martial artists. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated, they added fuel to the fire. Because in martial arts culture, humility matters. When a martial artist appears unwilling to test themselves, people don't just question their skill, they question their character. That's why Beyond the Lookout Yeung's supposed challenge carried so much weight. It symbolized a demand for truth in a world full of performance. But here's the key point many people overlook. Steven Seagal never publicly acknowledged any challenge from Bolo Yeung. No confirmation. No denial. Just silence. And silence, in the martial arts world, is often interpreted in different ways. Was it wisdom? Was it arrogance? Or was it simply Hollywood protecting an image? Do you think silence in the face of criticism shows strength or weakness? Because next, we'll dive into the alleged challenge itself, what was said, who said it, and how this story may have grown far beyond the truth. This is the part of the story where facts begin to blur, memories conflict, and legend starts to take over. Because despite decades of discussion, interviews, and fan debates, there is no official record of a formal challenge between Bolo Yeung and Steven Seagal. No contract. No witnesses on camera. No confirmed meeting where both men agreed to test their skills. And yet, the story refuses to die. So where did it come from? According to people who claim to have been close to the martial arts and film circles at the time, the challenge was never meant to be public. It was said to be casual, a conversation, a comment, a question raised behind closed doors. Some versions claim Bolo Yeung expressed curiosity about Aikido's effectiveness against a strong, resisting opponent. Others suggest he openly doubted whether Seagal's techniques would work outside of choreographed settings. In traditional martial arts culture, questioning another style isn't always disrespect. Often, it's an invitation to learn, or to test. But intent can easily be misunderstood. One popular version of the story claims Bolo said something along the lines of, "Let's see if it works." Not as an insult, but as a challenge rooted in realism. To Bolo, testing skill wasn't about dominance. It was about truth. Another version claims the message never reached Seagal directly. Instead, it traveled through assistants, producers, or mutual acquaintances, becoming distorted with every retelling. This is how martial arts myths are born. A question becomes a challenge. A challenge becomes a refusal. And a refusal becomes fear. From Steven Seagal's side, there was no public reaction. No interview addressing Bolo Yeung. No acknowledgement that a challenge ever existed. And that silence fueled speculation. To some fans, silence meant Seagal didn't feel the need to respond. To others, it looked like avoidance, especially given the growing skepticism around movie-based martial arts. If someone questions your ability publicly, do you owe them a response, or does silence protect your dignity? But here's another layer people rarely consider. At the height of Seagal's fame, he was a major Hollywood asset. Studios invest millions into images, not just actors. Any real confrontation, even a friendly one, carried risk. Injury. Loss of mystique. Loss of control. In Hollywood, reality is often the enemy of branding. From that perspective, refusing any kind of unscripted test wasn't cowardice, it was business. Meanwhile, Bolo Yeung had nothing to lose. His reputation wasn't built on invincibility or mystique. It was built on discipline, strength, and quiet respect among martial artists. That imbalance matters. Some martial artists later claimed Bolo wasn't angry or obsessed with Seagal at all. He simply moved on. The story only grew because fans wanted an answer that never came. Do you think martial arts legends should be judged by real tests, or by their overall contribution to the art? Another important detail often ignored is cultural difference. Bolo came from an environment where martial artists tested themselves privately and informally. Seagal came from a world where image, hierarchy, and public perception mattered more. Different cultures interpret challenge very differently. What one sees as curiosity, another sees as disrespect. So was there ever a real confrontation waiting to happen? Most credible sources say no. What existed was tension, philosophical tension. A clash of values, not fists. And that tension was amplified by fans, forums, and the internet long after both men had moved on. Do you think this story became bigger than reality because fans wanted a winner? Because next, we're going to break down the styles themselves, Aikido versus Kung Fu, and explore what might have happened if theory met resistance. To truly understand why the rumored clash between Bolo Yeung and Steven Seagal fascinated so many people, we need to step away from personalities for a moment and look at the martial arts themselves. Because at its core, this debate was never just about two men. It was about Aikido versus Kung Fu, two systems built on completely different ideas of combat. Kung Fu, especially traditional Chinese systems, emphasizes structure, conditioning, repetition, and power generation. Practitioners spend years strengthening their stances, bones, tendons, and striking surfaces. The goal is to remain stable under pressure while delivering force efficiently. In Kung Fu, the body is trained like a weapon. Strength isn't accidental, it's cultivated to survive resistance. This explains why fighters like Beyond the Lookout Young placed such importance on physical conditioning. Against resistance, fatigue, and pain, the body must hold up. Theory alone isn't enough. Aikido, on the other hand, follows a very different path. Instead of hard conditioning, Aikido emphasizes sensitivity, timing, and redirection. The practitioner learns to feel an opponent's balance, guide their momentum, and apply joint locks or throws with minimal force. Aikido isn't about overpowering someone, it's about making their aggression work against them. This is where confusion often arises. In controlled environments, Aikido can look incredibly effective. An attacker rushes in, loses balance, and ends up on the ground. But critics argue that these demonstrations rely heavily on cooperation, attackers who commit fully and allow techniques to unfold. When you watch martial arts demonstrations, do you believe what you see, or do you need to see resistance to be convinced? Now imagine these two styles meeting. A Kung Fu practitioner like Beyond the Lookout Young wouldn't rush blindly. He would test distance, apply pressure gradually, and resist manipulation. His goal wouldn't be to charge, it would be to stay rooted and overwhelmed through strength and structure. Rooting, the ability to stay grounded under force, is a cornerstone of traditional Chinese martial arts. For Aikido, this creates a challenge. Many Aikido techniques rely on an opponent stepping forward, grabbing, or overcommitting. Against someone who resists, retracts, and refuses to play that role, timing becomes critical. But this doesn't mean Aikido is useless. Against grabs, pushes, or untrained aggression, Aikido can end a fight quickly. Joint locks and balance breaks don't require size, they require precision. Do you think martial arts should be judged against trained fighters, or against real-world, untrained attackers? This is where the debate becomes honest. Kung Fu excels under prolonged pressure. Aikido excels in brief, decisive moments. Each art has environments where it shines, and environments where it struggles. No martial art is universal. Effectiveness depends on timing, intent, and context. If Bolo and Seagal had tested their skills, it wouldn't have been a simple winner-takes-all scenario. It would have been an experiment, revealing strengths, weaknesses, and limitations on both sides. But fans often want certainty. They want a winner. They want dominance. They want closure. And martial arts rarely offer that. If two masters from different styles meet, should the goal be victory or understanding? This is why the rumored challenge remains unresolved in people's minds. It represents an unanswered question. Is power more reliable than precision? Or can timing defeat strength? The truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes strength wins. Sometimes technique wins. And sometimes, neither works the way we expect. Reality doesn't follow choreography, it follows chaos. This is why many traditional martial artists avoid public challenges. Not because they're afraid, but because outcomes don't always honor philosophy. And that brings us back to the heart of this story. The absence of a real confrontation didn't weaken the debate, it strengthened it. Because without proof, imagination fills the gap. If this test had happened, would you want it to be a controlled exchange, or a full, unpredictable confrontation? Because next, we'll look at what most credible sources agree actually happened, and why the truth may be simpler and more human than the legend. After all the rumors, debates, and heated opinions, we arrive at the most important question of all. What actually happened between Beyond the Lookout Young and Steven Seagal? The honest answer may disappoint some fans, but it reveals something deeper. According to the most credible interviews, historians, and people close to the martial arts and film communities, there was never a confirmed direct challenge that both men acknowledged and agreed to. No meeting. No scheduled test. No confrontation behind closed doors. What existed instead was speculation. In martial arts culture, stories often grow larger than reality because people project their own beliefs onto them. Bolo Yeung never publicly accused Steven Seagal of cowardice. He never mocked him in interviews. In fact, in later years, Bolo spoke respectfully about other martial artists and focused on his own training and legacy. Steven Seagal, likewise, never publicly mentioned Bolo Yeung in any serious way. He neither accepted nor rejected a challenge, because, from his perspective, there may never have been one to respond to. This is where many fans misunderstand the situation. Silence does not always mean avoidance. Sometimes, it simply means non-participation. Not every question deserves an answer, especially when responding might validate a narrative you never agreed to. By the time the rumor gained traction, both men were at very different stages of their lives and careers. Seagal was deeply embedded in Hollywood, balancing public image, contracts, and expectations. Bolo Yeung had already cemented his reputation and had little interest in proving anything to fans. Do you think ignoring rumors is the strongest response, or does it allow misinformation to grow? Another key point often overlooked is risk. Real martial arts testing is unpredictable. Even friendly exchanges can result in injury, misunderstanding, or humiliation. For public figures, the cost of a single bad moment can outweigh any potential respect gained. Martial artists train to reduce risk, not to create unnecessary chaos. This is why many respected masters avoid public challenges entirely. Not because they lack confidence, but because they understand how easily skill can be misrepresented outside its proper context. And then there's the role of the audience. Fans wanted a clash because it symbolized something larger. Real versus cinematic. Power versus technique. Tradition versus performance. But those are false binaries. Most martial artists don't live at extremes. They live in nuance. Kung Fu and Aikido are not enemies. They are tools shaped by different histories, cultures, and purposes. Expecting one to dominate the other misunderstands both. Do you think martial arts debates focus too much on who would win instead of what can we learn? As years passed, the rumor lost connection to reality and became entertainment. Forums repeated it. Videos dramatized it. Each retelling added confidence but removed evidence. And that's how legends form. The absence of a fight became more powerful than any fight could have been. When there's no outcome, imagination fills the gap, and imagination rarely favors balance. What most reliable sources agree on is simple. Be on the lookout. Yeung respected martial discipline. Steven Seagal followed a different path. Neither man publicly sought conflict. And neither man needed one. If two masters choose peace over proof, should that be respected or questioned? The truth is, this story survived not because of hostility, but because of contrast. Two men represented two different answers to the same question. What does real martial arts mean? For Bolo, it meant pressure, conditioning, and testing. For Seagal, it meant control, philosophy, and avoidance of unnecessary conflict. Neither answer is wrong. They're just different. And that realization sets the stage for the final part of this story, where we step back from rumors and look at legacy. What did both men leave behind? And what should we, as martial arts fans, actually take from this debate? After decades of debate, rumor, and speculation, we finally arrive at the conclusion of one of martial arts' most enduring what-if stories. The alleged challenge between Bolo Yeung and Steven Seagal may never have happened. And yet, its impact has been felt far beyond the gym or the movie set. Because sometimes, the story itself is more important than the event. Two legends, two paths. Bolo Yeung and Steven Seagal represent two very different interpretations of martial arts, and both have left indelible marks on the world. Bolo Yeung is remembered as the embodiment of discipline and strength. His reputation was built on decades of rigorous training, dedication to fundamentals, and mastery of Kung Fu. In the movies, he often played the villain, the antagonist, the muscle. But in reality, his respect for the craft and the people around him defined him. Fans may have admired his size and power, but fellow martial artists respected his integrity and mastery. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, represents a different philosophy: control, timing, and subtlety. His Aikido was often misunderstood by fans who wanted flashy strikes, but for those who study martial arts seriously, his approach was about efficiency and precision. Seagal's Hollywood career may have made him a controversial figure, but it also brought Aikido to global attention, inspiring thousands to study the art in ways they never would have otherwise. These two men remind us that martial arts isn't just about winning fights. It's about discipline, philosophy, and self-expression. One path values physical dominance, the other values harmony and strategy. Both are valid, and both have lessons to offer. The myth versus reality. The story of A Confrontation grew because it tapped into something fans love: the idea of testing limits. What happens when strength meets technique? When ego meets discipline? When mythology meets reality? The truth, that no confirmed challenge occurred, doesn't diminish the story. It enhances its lesson. Sometimes restraint is the greatest demonstration of skill. Neither Bolo nor Seagal needed to prove themselves to each other. Their legacies were already established through consistent practice, performance, and philosophy. In life, and in martial arts, the most powerful victories are often invisible to the public eye. Strength isn't always measured by fights won or challenges accepted. Sometimes it's measured by restraint, wisdom, and respect. Why the story matters today. This story resonates even now because it shows the difference between real skill and perception. In a world where social media glorifies confrontation, we are reminded that not all battles are meant to be fought. Bolo Yeung's path teaches that preparation, consistency, and respect for fundamentals create true mastery. Steven Seagal's path teaches that strategy, control, and understanding of principles can be just as powerful as brute force. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches that legends don't need to prove themselves in conflict. Their actions, dedication, and integrity speak louder than a single fight ever could. Which lesson resonates more with you? The disciplined, powerful path of Bolo, or the controlled, philosophical path of Seagal?
Why?
Comment below and let's hear your thoughts. Martial arts beyond the rumor. It's easy to get caught up in who would win debates. But the Bolo versus Seagal story reminds us to step back and ask bigger questions. What does martial arts mean beyond fighting? How do you measure skill if not by confrontation? And how much does ego influence our perception of strength? Both men have inspired millions in different ways. Bolo through physical excellence and cinematic presence, Seagal through technical precision and philosophical influence. Their impact goes beyond fights and movie sets. It's felt in gyms, dojos, and personal practice around the world. True mastery isn't just about defeating others. It's about inspiring them, passing knowledge forward, and living in alignment with your discipline. The final takeaway. If we strip away rumor, speculation, and drama, the real lesson is clear. Respect is universal. Bolo and Seagal never needed a confrontation to earn it. Strength comes in many forms. Physical power, timing, strategy, and discipline all matter. Legends are defined by consistency, not single moments. What people remember isn't the fights that did or didn't happen, but the philosophy, skill, and integrity behind the fighter. The alleged challenge may have been a myth, but the story remains a lesson. It teaches martial artists, fans, and even casual observers about humility, patience, and perspective. Do you think legends are made by their victories, or by how they handle challenges they never need to face? Share your opinion in the comments. Call to action. If this story taught you something about strength, discipline, or respect, type respect in the comments. And if you love uncovering the truth behind martial arts legends, subscribe for more stories where we separate myth from reality and find the lessons that matter most. Because in the end, the Bolo Yeung versus Steven Seagal story isn't about a fight. It's about legacy, philosophy, and the quiet power of mastery.